Ladies and gentlemen, this is the most terrifying thing I've ever witnessed.
Hey humans, it's Hannah. Welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, I do videos on creepy and disturbing things, so if that's also your thing, consider subscribing. So we're gonna go back in time today, all the way to the 1930s actually, back to the radio interruption that caused panic all throughout the nation, and made many people believe that the world was actually ending and that we were under some sort of Martian attack. Here's what happened. CBS Radio used to have this series called The Mercury Theater on the Air, hosted and performed by Orson Welles. If you don't know who Orson Welles is, he was an American actor, producer, director, and screenwriter. He was known for a lot of works, but most notably, the one you might have heard of is 1941 Citizen Kane. So he also had this radio show called The Mercury Theater on the Air. It aired every Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And on this particular Sunday, the night it all went down, it happened to be October 30th, 1938. And so this was his 17th episode of the show, and because it was so close to Halloween, he wanted to make a Halloween special. War of the Worlds was originally a science fiction novel that was written and published in the late 1800s by an author named H.G. Wells. The story is about the Earth being invaded by Martians. This is what Orson Welles wanted to base his special on. A man named Howard Koch changed the novel into a play adaptation specifically for the radio, and he set it in contemporary America rather than late 1800s in Europe. He wrote it as if it was a live news broadcast, interrupting the regularly scheduled program to inform America of all the horrible things happening across the nation. Orson Welles used extremely realistic sound effects as well as very good actors in order to make his radio segment very convincing. The entire radio broadcast is over an hour long, so of course you can go listen to that. But if you want a summarized version, I will summarize what happens in the broadcast here and include some clips from the real original broadcast. Here we go. So it starts out as this normal news broadcast giving the weather report, and then they interrupt that for some dance music. Some old-timey late 30s dance music.
Next 24 hours, not much change in temperature. A slight atmospheric disturbance of undetermined origin is reported over Nova Scotia, causing a low-pressure area to move down rather rapidly over the northeastern states, bringing a forecast of rain accompanied by winds of light gale force.
Suddenly, there's this news flash, and they cut the program instantly to inform us that there has been some explosions detected on Mars.
Ladies and gentlemen, we interrupt our program of dance music to bring you a special bulletin from the Intercontinental Radio News. At 20 minutes before 8 Central Time, Professor Farrell of the Mount Jennings Observatory, Chicago, Illinois, reports observing several explosions of incandescent gas occurring at regular intervals on the planet Mars. The spectroscope indicates the gas to be hydrogen and moving toward the Earth with enormous velocity. Professor Pearson of the observatory at Princeton...
The music soon returns, but then the music is quickly interrupted again. This time with the news that a weird object has fallen in Groversville, New Jersey, and this weird object they believe is a meteorite.
It is reported that at 8:50 p.m. a huge flaming object, believed to be a meteorite, fell on a farm in the neighborhood of Grover's Mill, New Jersey, 22 miles from Trenton.
So then there's this reporter on the site in New Jersey describing what's going on there. A large crowd has gathered next to the meteor. The reporter describes everything they're seeing, and then he says that he sees this giant metal cylinder.
Well, I hardly know where to begin. To paint for you a word picture of the strange scene before my eyes, like something out of a modern Arabian Nights. Well, I just got here. I haven't had a chance to look around yet. I guess that's it. Yes, I guess that's the thing directly in front of me. Half buried in a vast pit. Must have struck with terrific force. The ground is covered with splinters of a tree. It must have struck on its way down. But I can see of the object itself doesn't look very much like a meteor. At least not the meteors I've seen. It looks more like a huge cylinder. Has a diameter of, what would you say, Professor?
This cylinder is right next to the site where the meteor hit. He describes a tentacled monster that starts appearing from inside.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the most terrifying thing I've ever witnessed. Wait a minute. Someone crawling someone or something. I can see turning out of that black hole two luminous discs. The eyes, it might be a face, might be almost Good heavens, something wriggling out of the shadow like a gray snake. Now it's another one and another one and another one. They look like tentacles to me. Oh, yeah, I can see the thing's body now. It's large as a bear. It glistens like wet leather, but that face, ladies and gentlemen, it's indescribable. I can hardly force myself to keep looking at it. It's so awful. The eyes are black and they gleam like a serpent. The mouth is kind of V-shaped with saliva dripping from its rimless lips that seem to quiver and pulsate, and the monster or whatever it is can hardly move.
So then police officers come to the site and they try to wave a flag of truce. However, of course, the Martians don't respond well to this and they reply with heat rays. This, of course, starts complete chaos. It sets the nearby woods on fire and everybody starts to scream. The Martians then start using this heat ray to kill everybody in their path.
Studying the object while the captain and two policemen advance with something in their hands. I can see it now. It's a white handkerchief tied to a pole. Flag of truce. If those creatures know what that means, what anything means. Wait a minute, something's happening. Humped shape is rising out of the pit. I can make out a small beam of light against a mirror. What's that? There's a jet of flame springing from the mirror, and it leaps right at the advancing men. It strikes them head on.
Artillery and bombers try to attempt to destroy the cylinders, but this just, of course, aggravates the Martians more, so they decide to release this giant amount of black poisonous gas. And then this supposed reporter on the scene is describing more of the chaos around him. And then suddenly we hear him say, "It's coming this way now." And then after a few seconds, there is just suddenly dead air.
Lord, they're turning into flames. Now the whole field's caught up by the woods, the barns, the gas tanks of the automobiles spreading everywhere. It's coming this way now, about 20 yards to my right.
And then right after that, it's kind of funny because then the radio broadcaster says this.
Ladies and gentlemen, due to circumstances beyond our control, we are unable to continue the broadcast from Grover's Mill. Evidently, there's some difficulty with our field transmission.
So now there's another piano interlude, but now clearly the radio station is very panicked and isn't really sure what to do at this point. The broadcaster then says that they received a telecast from Grover's Mill that 40 people lie dead and burned / distorted from all recognition on the site in New Jersey where this meteor hit. Then General Montgomery Smith from Trenton, New Jersey calls martial law. Thousands of people are clogging the highways trying to escape, and there's just mayhem everywhere. The aliens are destroying bridges, power stations, everything. So then the radio broadcast eventually goes to New York, where there's a reporter in New York explaining what's happening there. He says there's black smoke everywhere, there's people jumping into the East River, and other people just dropping like flies. Even worse, he says that all over the country, these Martian cylinders are now falling onto random cities. And then suddenly he's describing this black, gassy smoke coming his way. This reporter falls silent after having a coughing fit, and then we can't hear him anymore, and all we hear is the horrible, horrific sounds of the city collapsing around him.
100 yards away. It's 50 feet.
The ham radio operator is finally heard saying this.
2X2L calling CQ, New York. Isn't there anyone on the air? Isn't there anyone on the air? Isn't there anyone?
So then there's an intermission to the program. The rest of the radio broadcast is a character named Professor Pearson, played by Orson Welles, who is supposedly one of the survivors of this giant attack. He starts out in the Grover's Mill, New Jersey area, and then he survives that and he is able to travel from New Jersey to New York, and looking at the aftermath of these Martians all along the way. When he gets to New York, he discovered that actually all the Martians have died. Apparently they had no immunity to a lot of the microbes on our planet, which actually makes a lot of sense. So everything eventually will go back to normal because they came, but then they all died. So that's an overview of the broadcast itself and what people were hearing on this night. Side note, it's so funny that this reminds me of what we now talk about as ARGs, alternate reality games, or web series works of unfiction, because we have these all over the internet now, and it seems like this was like the OG version of that, because it was basically telling this horror story without explaining really outright, making it really realistic so people weren't sure what was true and what wasn't. Anyway, here's the aftermath. Legend has it that many of the people listening panicked so much because they were originally listening to the Chase and Sanborn Hour with with Edgar Bergen. This was a very popular variety and comedy radio show that ran from 1929 to 1948. And then during one of the musical interludes, people changed the station to the War of the Worlds broadcast, missing the introduction to the show, disclaiming that it was just a drama, so they didn't know that it wasn't real. However, it's highly debated to this day how many people this broadcast actually scared. There was widespread media outrage the days following this broadcast, in spite of the fact that it was announced 4 different times throughout the broadcast that this was just a work of fiction and a dramatization. Thousands of people allegedly called CBS, the newspapers, and the police station trying to figure out on this night if it was real or not. And of course, this made the mass panic seem way more widespread and way more real. You also have to remember that during this time, America was also super on edge and very vulnerable to believing this kind of thing. The war had ended not long ago and a new war was going to start soon. The Great Depression was also alive and well still. Additionally, the Hindenburg disaster had just happened. The Hindenburg disaster was a German passenger airship that caught fire and was destroyed, killing 36 people, and this had just been broadcast over the radio the year before. So the panic during this time was actually pretty understandable. However, 5,000 households were contacted soon after this broadcast for a radio rating survey. Only 2% of the respondents were actually listening to War of the Worlds this night. The Chase and Sanborn Hour was way more popular, and most of the people were listening to that or not listening to anything at all. So like I said, it's actually thought that there were way fewer people that actually panicked about this than we originally thought. And then there's another theory, which I think is a strong one, that the newspapers at the time sensationalized this story and made it seem like there was mass panic everywhere because of their competition with the radio stations. Basically, the newspapers wanted us to stop trusting the radio. Radio broadcasting was relatively new at this time, especially as a form of widely spreading news very quickly. And so of course the newspapers saw radio broadcasting as a huge competitor. The newspapers called it mass hysteria, saying that there were suicide attempts, heart attacks, and mass exodus from major metropolitan areas, which most of this was completely untrue or highly embellished. Orson Welles, of course, seemed shocked that he caused so much panic. However, he has made slight hints here and there through the years that perhaps he did know what he was doing all along and did know the possible outcome, and was maybe even hoping for this type of reaction, but he just couldn't predict that it was going to be as large as they were making it seem. Good old Orson Welles. That's going to be it for today. Please leave me a comment down below and let me know what you think. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you made it to the end, and I will see everybody in the next one.